I'm pleased to introduce Columbus Rotary's own Don Baur, a 25-year Rotarian, Paul Harris Fellow. Don spent 40 years in the information technology field as his primary employment, but had another job, and that was an official in college football. Don coached in the Big Ten, Mid-American Conference, as well as Division III. He was also lucky enough to ref multiple college bowl games. Don has worked as an official in multiple capacities, including head referee, replay official, and game timer. Don has been the past president of the Big Ten Officials Association, Ohio Association of Football Officials, and the Central Ohio Football Officials Association. I have known Don and his wife Paula and their children for many years, having grown up with him in the Cardinal Boosters football. As commissioner and coach, Don always seemed to have the best football teams. I was lucky enough, though, to play with Don for many years growing up. Today, Don will be giving an inside look at college football from his perspective as someone who spent multiple years officiating on the gridiron. If you enjoy college football, you're in the right place. I'm pleased to introduce Columbus Rotary's own Don Baur.
Thank you, Toby. I have known him for a long time, and Toby's a great athlete. He was all Mid-American defensive end at Ball State, playing for Brady Hoke. So he's a much better athlete than probably anybody in the room. Doug, if somebody turn on that, I'd appreciate it. But I want to say I have had a chance over the years to talk to some groups, and usually I know a couple people, but today, obviously, I know a lot more of you, so I hope you go easy on me. But I want you to know I've been booed by 100,000 people at one time, and I'm going to try and use small words and talk slow in case there's any Quanians in the room. I will, and there will be a test afterwards, so pay attention. I will talk first about officiating in 2015. The one thing that has not changed is how you get to be in the Big Ten or any other Division I conference. You have to start at the bottom. You have to take a test in a class given by the Ohio High School Athletic Association. You cannot work varsity games for the first 2 years. You have to work freshman or JV or youth league. Then you move up and probably work college JV games. Now we're fortunate in Central Ohio. We have Capital, Otterbein, Wesleyan, Ohio Dominican still play JV games on Monday afternoons or Monday evenings, and frankly, those are the real football players. They're out there. They might have 20 people in the stands. Their parents, parents or their girlfriends, and they're out there Monday afternoon. They know they're not going to get in. They don't get any money, but they play JV. Okay. So after that, you might move up to Division III, which is, as I said, Capital, Otterbein, Wesleyan, Denison, Wittenberg, and then might move up to the football championship series system, which is like Youngstown State. It used to be called Division II or Division I AA. And then if you're fortunate enough, you can move up to the Big Ten. So I'm going to go through a typical week of a Big Ten football official. I'll start on Thursday. On Thursday, it's kind of a last-minute check. You kind of check your bag, make sure everything's there in order. Check flight arrangements or maybe where you're going to meet a fellow official. On Friday, you have to be in the game city by 8 p.m. Really, you have to be in the game city. Typically, you go to dinner with the other guys in the crew, where you might talk sports or you just catch up with maybe the last week's game or something like that. So Friday's a busy day, travel day. On game day, I'll take Ohio State if there aren't no 1:30 games, but in the morning you have breakfast together. You will do a pregame conference, which you sit around and talk rules and specifics and mechanics of where you're going to be and so forth. And Ohio State, you travel 3 hours before the game, a police escort down to the Woody Hayes facility where you change from your street clothes into your officiating clothes. Then you go to the stadium once again under police escort. And once you get to the stadium, there's a lot of things that have to happen. The referee and the umpire go visit the head coaches, and they ask them such things as, what are your captain's numbers? What if you have any trick plays? You give them the official time, and just discuss anything with the head coach, just trying to kind of establish a little bit of rapport there. Then you have to go on the field 60 minutes before the game. That's kind of the Ohio State-Illinois rule. A few years ago, Ohio State players like charged to this 50-yard line with Illinois. They didn't cross it, but since then officials have to be out there 60 minutes before just in case anything happens. Then just when the teams leave the field, the officials can go back and just do a last-minute check and get their flags and everything, whistle everything ready, and just go out and do the game. Then they do the game, and I'll talk more about that in a second. After the game, here's what happens now. After the game, each official receives a DVD as he walks out of the locker room of the game that they just did. In other words, Ohio State can press 20 different, same CD, 20 at a time. So they give one each to the officials. And sometimes you can get out on Friday night or Saturday night, sometimes you can. If you're in Lincoln, Nebraska, you probably aren't going to make it home on Saturday night, so you get home on Sunday. Within 24 hours, each official has to write a report about his game, the calls that he made or didn't make, or why he made a call, why he didn't make a call. That has to go, it goes up to a website, protected website, and reviewed. So that's what happens after the game. During a week, there's obviously phone calls and texts and everything going back between all the members of the crew. You get to review the game, you get a grade during the week from an observer who could be in Kansas City or Los Angeles. It doesn't matter. They put them up on the web, and everybody, there is a grader. So he submits grades. Then on Wednesday night, here in Central Ohio, we have a local meeting where all the college officials, including the Division III and others, participate. So that's like a rules meeting for about an hour and a half, probably. Some people have always asked me why I officiate. Well, I was never a good athlete, still am not, and I just wanted to stay around athletics. I thought it was fun, and it's a good way to do that. It does give you a mental break if you're working at a job. I mean, you're stressed or you got some problem at home or the job. Once you get on the field, or even really with the other guys, it's a strong mental diversion. It's not about the money. Here's the money situation in the Big Ten. Each official gets $2,800 per game, but they have to take all their expenses out of that. So if you have to fly to Lincoln, you get short notice, so you're probably going to pay $500 or $600 at least for airfare, stay 2 nights, rent a car, and by the time you get done, you're not making that much money. I mean, it's a nice little bonus you can use, but it's not kind of as sweet as you might think. There is some risk of injury. There was recently an NFL official got hurt real badly lives in Findlay. Personally, the only thing that ever happened to me was I broke my finger and working in Ohio State practice, and I almost got hit in Iowa. Is anybody here from Iowa? Okay, well, Iowa's a funny situation. Iowa, they play their big rival is Minnesota. It's called Floyd of Rosedale Trophy. Floyd of Rosedale is a pig. And in 1935, the two governors of the 2 states made a bet, and the loser had to provide a pig for the other one. So Iowa lost, so the president of Iowa went up to the door of the president of Minnesota's office, opened the door, and shoved in a live pig. And after that, the Minnesota guy said, well, I don't think we want a live pig going back and forth, so he created a statue, and that's what they trade now. But in Iowa, one time, it was the last game of the year. It was real cold. It started snowing about 5 o'clock Friday afternoon. It was a terrible day. And neither team was going to a bowl. And so the students were really hooting and hollering and I think liquored up. And one of them threw a liquor bottle. It hit me on the hip. Fortunately, it didn't hit me in the head, but it did. So Iowa can be dangerous. Another thing at Iowa that happened, and I was officiating and watching. I was right down the line where they kick off, and there was a guy. It was windy, so there was a guy holding the ball, and this kicker came up, and I swear to God, the holder let the ball go, just like Lucy and Peanuts, you know. And I mean, this kid's getting a full ride scholarship, probably worth $50,000 at the time, and he couldn't even hold the ball. So the kicker just barely got the top of it, so it did count as a kick, but it was crazy. So anyway, like I say, Iowa's a tough situation. Okay, I'm going to talk now about the different positions and the letters and major responsibilities and toughest calls. The referee is in the offensive backfield. He's on the throwing side of the quarterback, which 90% of the people in the world are right-handed, so he's usually on the right hand. His toughest call is probably whether it's a pass or an incomplete pass or a fumble. In other words, if the quarterback is arms going forward and the ball comes out, was that an incomplete pass or was that a fumble? Now, fortunately, with replay, now your inclination will be to let it go and see what happens. And if it was a fumble, then of course somebody could have recovered and gone down the field. If it was a pass, it's just an incomplete pass, and you go back to the line of scrimmage. So now you would if there's any doubt, you let it go, and you go to replay and see what it really was. But that's a tough call because you got to make it in less than a second. The umpire stands behind the defensive line, and he calls basically the two guards in the center for holding. And let me say something right here: there is not holding on every play. People say that you could not call holding on every play, but he calls holding if it's there, and then he makes sure the snap is proper and so forth. The two guys on the wings, we call on the sidelines, one has the L, he's the line judge. The other one has the H, and he's the head linesman. Their duties are pretty much the same. They got to make sure the snap is clean and everybody's on side, no false starts, things like that. And then he's got calls. If there's a sweep to his side, he's got to call. If there's holding, if a guy goes out of bounds, where does he go out of bounds? Sometimes he'll have to help on a trap ball. But the two guys on the line of scrimmage have a lot to do every play. Most of us that worked on that position had a pre-snap routine we went through. Some of them go ABC, some of them go 1, 2, 3. A is make sure they're lined up, but make sure they got 7 on the line. B is something else, and so forth. But there's a lot happening every play. The two guys deep is S stands for side judge, F for field judge. They watch the widest receivers, and as they come down, and if there's pass, their toughest call is pass interference. There's no question about it, because there is a lot of judgment in that call, and you have to read intent, which is always hard to do for anybody. But they have to be alert for passes and long runs. The back judge, same way. The back judge key, his initial key is the tight end on his side, and he watches to see what kind of. I should have said back with the line judge and the head linesman. Their key is the tackle. They watch the end of the tackle. If the tackle fires out, it's probably going to be a run. If he backs up, it's probably going to be a pass. And if you're ever watching a football game and you're there in person, you can't do it on TV because TV makes you watch what they want you to watch. But if you're ever at a game and the ball is reasonably close in front of you, and just watch the tackle in the end and see whether you can judge what kind of play it's going to be. Same way with the referee. If the quarterback drops back right away, he's more than likely it's going to be a pass. Now, not always, but that's a good start anyway. Now, here's the one that was new last year, and when Big Ten accepted, a center judge. Now, he stands behind in the offensive backfield opposite the referee. His job is to watch the tackle in the end on his sideline, on his side, but he has another important job. He spots the ball every play. You might see him, he'll run in and put the ball down for the next down. And if you notice, watch this sometime, if the offense substitutes, then that center judge will stand over the ball and make sure that the defense has its opportunity to sub, because you have to give the defense an opportunity to sub if the offense subs. So he stands over the ball. Now, Ohio State, I just noticed last week, just because I knew I was going to talk about this, that many times they don't sub. Now, if the offense does not sub, then the center judge backs out right away. But that's his job. Okay, those are the designations, and I'm going to talk real briefly about replay because I think most of you know. I say replay has come miles from when it started. Now they're all HD TVs, flat screen. They can up in the booth, a replay booth, there are 3 guys, and they can what they call spot shadow. In other words, if the ball bounces off the turf, they can bring the whole TV screen just showing that little bit. They call it a spot shadow, and that's come a long way, and that's helped the game a lot. I know sometimes they take a long time. Sometimes you think, maybe they shouldn't, but there's a lot to consider in that. And you know that if the referee says that the play stands, that means there was not enough evidence to overturn the call. If he says it was confirmed, that means it was confirmed and he has enough evidence to confirm the call. And the third option would be to reverse the call, which we hope doesn't happen. Okay, let's move on to what I call the landscape. There are 5 Power 5. The 5 conferences make up the Power 5 conferences. Thought it was lost my place. Okay, the ACC, Atlantic Coast, Southeast Conference, Big Ten, Big 12, In the Pac-10, there are 12. There are 63 schools that make up what they call the Power Conference. Now, this is not an official designation. That's just what they call it. They've all changed in the past 5 years. And now geography doesn't seem to mean a thing, because it used to be that a conference would just add a school in a contiguous state. Well, that's certainly not the case now. We've got Missouri going to the southeast and Texas going to the southeast. We got West Virginia going to the Big 12, Utah going to Pac-10, and of course the Big 10 going to New Jersey and Maryland. So obviously they don't follow that rule anymore. Why do they do that? They do that for money, because it's all about money. It's all about TV and social media. What's going to happen? They don't care so much about even attendance. As you know, attendance is off in most places, and certainly in Ohio State. So, I'm sorry. I know what I was going to say. The rule changes were heavy last year and included several rules about targeting and use of the helmet. And we've seen that already at Ohio State. I've seen it in high school games. And they don't want the head used as a weapon, or they don't want an opponent to hit the player in the head. And why? That's because of concussion. Now, one word, concussion, is going to creep in more and more into college football. And it already has affected others. For instance, in high school, Ohio, 2014 and 2015 were about even, but for the previous 5 years, attendance participation declined for the previous 5 years in high school, and it's really showing up in the youth leagues. The Worthington Youth League is down 15% a year for the last 5 years. And I know of one Dublin league that's down because my grandson was playing in it. So it's really affected the youth leagues. There's not that much participation. Now, I'm not saying that the game of football is going away, but I'm just saying that it's got some problems, and everybody recognizes that. So let me talk now about the playoff. First thing I'll say is not the NCAA, which probably is good. The NCAA is not running it. It's a association of the 5 power conferences. Each conference has a representative on it. This year, it's the president of Nebraska on the governing council. Then they have another council that does the seedings and so forth, and sets out the playoffs and the game site and all that. That's another committee, but it's not run by the NCAA. So here's the payoff. This is by conference now. So the Big 10, you get $300,000 for every school in the conference that qualifies for the academic progress rate. That's APR. So all 14 of them in the Big 10 do qualify. So that's about $4 million. Just for just for being in a conference, you get $50 million. You don't have to do anything. You get $50 million for a conference. Now, if you participate in the Final Four, you get another $6 million. And there's $2 million thrown in there for expenses. You know that, $1 million here, $1 million there. So now that's what the payoff is, and I'm going to round that. I'll show you what that means to each school. But let me talk about the TV money now. Notre Dame, it was back in the 80s and 90s, everybody said, why isn't Notre Dame in the Big Ten? I mean, they were perfect geographically, they're great academically, they're athletically. But Notre Dame said no, they didn't want to be in the Big Ten. They said, we got our own conference, our own TV contract, we can play whoever we want to play. They said no. All right, that's good. Notre Dame gets $15 million a year until year 2023. The Big Ten network, each school gets $28 million. And each school gets $21 million from ESPN. Now the LSU athletic budget is $150 million roughly, so they get a third of their money between right there in the TV and then the payoff. But it also means the Big Ten is a one for all for one, which also means Indiana got it, and Purdue, which goes 4-9 or 4-8, they get the same thing that Ohio State does, even though Ohio State, all that money. But in this whole deal about concussions, the President Obama, I guess, didn't have anything else to say, but he got in the mix of it, and he said, and I quote, "If I had a son, I'd have to think long and hard before I let him play football." And the crazy thing is that the President of the United States got involved 110 years ago in the year 1005, Teddy Roosevelt was president, and they had like 23 deaths that year in college football and many, many injuries. And they got a commission together, and Teddy Roosevelt was on there, and they almost banned college football. So here we have the president today worried about it. We also had the president 110 years ago worried about it. So, okay, now I'm going to give you some thoughts here that I've observed over 40 years. Now, you don't have to believe these, but I have the mic, so I think that athletics are a metaphor for society in several ways. We have a rule book, just like there are law books. The first 100 pages are rules, and the next 100 are interpretations. So that's similar to court laws and courts of law. There's also, if you break a law, you get a penalty. If you break a rule in football, you got a penalty if you're caught, I guess. Another thing that I think is similar is that I think there's a general disregard for authority, and I've seen this happen in officials, that people disregard the authority figure, they talk poorly and so forth. And I think there's some policemen that would probably say the same thing. So I think in society and sports we have the same thing. But perhaps the biggest one is what I call lack of responsibility. People don't take responsibility for their actions. And I must say, when I was working, I probably had a little bit guilty of that myself, blaming somebody else or blaming some other factor that I couldn't control. In football, in athletics, this goes too. I go back all the way to, this is not new, in 1987, 28 years ago, I was officiating a game at Michigan was at Indiana, and Indiana had not defeated Michigan for something like 40 years. And it was a big game, and Indiana won. And so Bo Schembechler couldn't stand that, so he blamed the officials. And Bo and Woody used to get by with a lot more post-game comments than what you can make right now. So Bo said, and I quote, "There were 6 idiots and 1 imbecile on the field," and talking about the officials. And so this of course before Facebook or email or anything, and one of my buddies sent to the Detroit Free Press, he said, "Hey Don, were you the imbecile or just one of the idiots?" You know? So Bo just couldn't take it. And I have another incident where in the year 2000, I was at a function, a lunch meeting 2 days before the Ohio State-Michigan game, and so of course that was a topic of conversation. And there was an old gentleman stood up, and you guys I'm sure all you guys at that table were at that game, weren't you? The Snowball, 1950. You know, the Snowball was a travesty. I mean, there were 42 punts. Ohio State had 3 first downs. Michigan had none. The snow, it should not have been played, but it was, but that's another subject. But anyway, this old gentleman stood up and he said, "And we'd have won that Ohio State-Michigan game if that referee would have given us that touchdown." And I'm thinking, wait a minute, this guy, is he nuts or what? And then I felt sorry for him. For 50 years, this guy had been harboring that guilt, He thought, for 50 years, he thought that Ohio State got screwed and didn't get that game. So that's my thought on that. I've got some observations here, and I've watched sporting events. I've been to the Olympics, I've been to the Pan Am Games, the World Cup, and I've been to 8-year-old soccer games, and I've been everything in between. I've been thousands of contests, and I say that less than 10 of them have been determined by officiating. It almost have to be an absolute guy doing it on purpose to throw a game. Now, this doesn't work if it's your children or your grandchildren. If you're watching your grandchildren or your children, don't go with this. But I say if you're watching another game, even the most one I can think of is the '72 Olympics in Munich, where the United States basketball team didn't, they put another 3 seconds on the clock. But even then, that wasn't the officials on the field. That was the administration of the game. So there are very few, unless somebody's really trying to cheat, and I haven't seen any evidence of that. The other thing is, as I said, if you look at an 8-year-old soccer game, or I've been to the World Cup, I said I've been to the World Series, the Final Four, the level of officiating matches the level of competition. So if you've got 8-year-olds playing soccer and you got a 14-year-old officiating, they're both going to make mistakes, but they're probably equal mistakes, if you will. But if you're watching the Super Bowl, they're going to make mistakes too, both the players and the officials. But I submit to you that the level of competition, and try that sometime when you're watching a contest. Here again, take your kids out of it, but that's my thought on that. So, one more. My conclusion, back to officiating, I hope that you've got some appreciation now for the third team on the field. There's never been a game without it. Our motto, and I think that you could apply this to business or family or whatever hobby or whatever, our motto is to start perfect and get better every game. And if you take that to work or home or wherever, I think that's not a bad thing to consider. Start perfect and get better every time. Lastly, without officials, it's just recess. Thanks. Yeah, Rich?
What do you think of paying the players?
The question is, how do I maintain my youthful good looks at my age? The question was, what do I think about pay for football? I actually anticipate, I got some figures for this. This is actually, you call it pay for play, but it's actually called the cost of attendance. And you can go on the Ohio State website and figure it out. They tell you what it costs, you know, for the normal student, the average student, in-state and out-state. So this year, they considered that the cost of attendance. Ohio State, every football player gets $3,128. Now, he has to like receipt it. He can't just go blow it. And he has to prepare a budget, and it's approved by one of the assistant coaches. So each coach might have 10 players that he's responsible for. Now, get this, they have to have a budget, and they have to learn how to balance a checkbook. Now, wouldn't you think that that's one of the requirements? Wouldn't you think that by the time they get to Ohio State University, they know how to balance a checkbook, but they might not. The value of the scholarship is about $16,000 a year. One other thing they did do, this came up last year at a bowl game, they approved up to $4,000 for a family to travel to a bowl game, so the players' families can travel. Now they have to receipt it and, you know, justify it and all that, but they did approve that. So that's pay for play. I think it's a very slippery slope. I think that, you know, with the Title IX and the women, I mean, are the women field hockey players going to get the same as much as a Big Ten football player? I don't know what's going to happen. I think that it has happened. It is happening. But I think that it's going to. I think over the long term, it's going to be some problems. You pay J.T. Barrett the same as you pay the guy sitting on the bench and the whole thing. But right now, that's the status. The status is that the Power 5 conferences can pay a cost of attendance. There's another money issue, and that is, this is called the abandon case. If a university sells like a shirt that's got, say, Barrett on the back, J.T. Barrett's name. They make money off of that, or any other use of it. You know, they put in uniforms or helmets or whatever. And the plaintiffs, which were the Power 5 conference, actually won that argument. That they said they would have you put $5,000 in an escrow account, and when the player graduated, he'd get that $5,000. Well, the NCAA appealed, and the NCAA won, and it was appealed again, and the NCAA's case was upheld. So right now, those players cannot make any money by likenesses off their shirts, but it's still in the courts. But it won once, but it got overturned on appeal. Teddy?
You said that prior to the game that the refs would get together and talk to the coaches and ask about if they had any trick plays. Can you expand on that a little bit more?
Well, basically, usually it's something to do like a fake field goal, you know, and we'll say, oh, they used to try stuff but the rules have cleaned it up a little bit. You know, they used to put the ball on the ground, have the car come around. Well, first of all, they can't do that anymore. But secondly, that type of thing. Mostly fake field goals or a double pass. We'll say, yeah, when, you know, they make two passes on the same down. Now, one of them has to be backwards, but that's what I meant by just they don't tell you anyway. They go ahead and do it anyway. Joanne.
You mentioned some of the work that the officials have to do after the game, after they get the DVD. Can you, if you have any stories, tell us how does an official keep his job, or maybe more importantly, how would an official lose his job?
Well, you get graded. There are different grading systems. But the one that's in place now in the Big Ten, as I said, it goes up on a website, and an independent observer observes that, and he grades the official on different plays. And yes, if you get consistently negative, it's on a 1 to 7 scale. I don't know why, but if you consistently get below 3 or 4, and they take them for the whole year, and the coaches have some input to that too, but we don't think they should, but because frankly they usually delegate it to a grad assistant or something. They don't really do it anyway, so that's why we don't put as much credence in that. But they do come into, it does come into play. Yeah, go on.
Can you explain the selection process for refs for the national championship game? And then also, is there an overall governing body for refs between the Big Ten or the Power 5 conferences?
The question is, how are the officials selected for the bowl games and the national championship, which the Big Ten had last year, by the way, on that grading system. So during the year, we try and work in crews, so the same 8 guys are together. Now there's exceptions, but most of the time they 8. But when they get to bowls and national championship, it's the number 1 head linesman, the number 1 line judge, the number 1 back judge, that type of thing. So they break that down, but it's all on that grade. And then what was the second part? Overall governing body. Not really. The NCAA does make the rules, and there is a rules committee, but as far as officiating, there are a couple associations, and we try and, Collegiate Commissioners Association is called, and they try and promulgate same mechanics everywhere. So yeah, there is a group, but the NCAA doesn't really not involved with it. Yeah.
What kind of turnover is there, Don, from high school to college?
Well, I think it's like a lot of jobs. The pyramid gets narrower at the top. I mean, the high school in Ohio, I mean, in Central Ohio, I don't know how many there are, but then you go to Division III college, and of course there's fewer, and then the Mid-American is the next step. And there's not a whole lot of turnover. Once you make a big-time college football, you probably tend to stay there. But there's some turnover, but yeah, Granger, I don't know a number.
Last Saturday there was an interesting play where J.T. Barrett shuffled the ball forward and Marshall went back to pass. Can you have 2 forward passes? It's just an interpretation. Because on the national broadcast they said this would be illegal if he passed the ball. Now that's kind of a gray area. It was it lateral? Did he hand the ball off to the guy, or did he forward throw it?
Well, I saw that too, and I heard what they said. That technically is a pass. I don't know whether anybody, whether they would have caught it or not if he had thrown the ball. But technically, you cannot have 2 forward passes in the same play. One of them has to be backward. But what they should do, and I'm surprised somebody hadn't told them, they should hand that ball. If they hand the ball to that back coming across, then he can throw the ball. But if there was air between the two, then I think that would be a pass. But Millie.
What I have noticed on TV is a big disparity in how the announcers value the Big Ten versus the SEC. Have you noticed that too, and why is that?
Well, I think why the question was a disparity between the Big Ten and the SEC. I mean, of course, I'm biased toward the Big Ten, but the SEC, you can't deny their success. I mean, they've had a lot of success, and I don't know, there are more of them in the polls than there were anyway, and they've won so many national championships. But the Big Ten's coming back, but really the Big Ten problem is the bottom half of the league, or the bottom, really 2/3 of the league is not that good. I mean, those SEC schools, they play just as many of the Appalachian states and the Lamars and all that as anybody else, as the Big Ten does, but their bottom 6 or 7 are probably better than the Big Ten's 6 or 7. So I think it's just history, or just past. They have had more success, no question about it. Yeah, Jim.
What type of protection do officials receive to protect them from irate fans during and after the game?
Question concerns security during and after the game. As I said, there wasn't a lot of security that day I got hit with that liquor bottle. I can say that. Most people have. Sometimes you go right in the stadium, and that's not a problem. There usually are officials, policemen or security people accompanying you. At Ohio State, for example, if you ever watch, they run right to the tunnel, and there's a van waiting on them. It can happen. I mean, if the crowd storms the field, you gotta take your hat off and your whistle off because something could happen there. But most of them are pretty good. When you get to, some of these schools aren't as good as others. I guess that's what I could say, but they're pretty good. But there have been lately some officials got hurt with 2 high school kids in Texas. I always saw that, wiped out official. There have been lawsuits, and we belong to an association called National Association of Sports Officials, and we have liability insurance covered by that. But it's not always easy. You got, especially like I said, if they storm the field, you got to really watch what you're doing. Keith.
Don, I know your son's a Big Ten official now. Is it pretty common to have father-son or family, maybe brothers, continue in officiating? And then also the other question. Did you ever try to step up to the NFL, or is that a totally different approach?
The first part is my son wasn't a Big Ten official. He actually retired, Keith. It was just getting too much. He got 3 kids, and so he retired. But he did make it, and that was a goal of his when he was 15 years old. He told me that we were officiating up at Perry Park, and he said he wanted to make the Big Ten, and he did. So I'm pretty proud of that. But I suppose the nepotism or legacy is as strong there as it is anywhere else. I mean, yes, because in my case, he started officiating when he was 14 years old, and he knew he went to big time games with me, so he was around big time officials. So I suppose yes, there's some amount of that. One more, Millie.
I just want to say something. I saw that game that you got hit. It was the pig that threw you.
Yeah, right. Wait a minute, one more thing. Where's Heiser? Where's Steve Heiser? Okay, I got $5 for the foundation if you can answer this question. How much does each Big Ten school get from TV? Within $1 million.
For 50 million, 28 and 21.
Huh?
There was one 28 and 21. Yeah, 28 and 21.
Yeah, 28 from the Big Ten Network, 21 from ESPN. My gosh, you got that. There's a contribution. Thanks.
Oh, thank you so much.
Aren't you going to do something with this?
Yeah, I forgot about that. I was going to throw this on somebody.
I just find it fascinating, all of the talent and stories we have within our club. So be sure and talk to folks about what they do, what they didn't do. We don't have a whole lot of time during the meetings, so grab somebody for lunch. Because those are fascinating stories, and we would have never known them. And be a Rotarian all week long.